The alarm buzzes, dragging you from sleep into a morning already full of chaos. Groggy and exhausted before the day has even properly begun, you reach for your phone only to find 5 missed calls, a dozen unread messages, and an email from your boss asking if you can quickly take care of something. And you know all too well that quickly never really means quickly. You climb out of bed, barely having had a sip of coffee, and instantly feel that your time is no longer yours. Your friend calls in a state of panic with the latest crisis. Your coworker relies on you to pick up the slack yet again, and your family expects you to be available no matter how overwhelmed you are. Amidst all this, there's that lingering guilt for even considering saying no. If this sounds familiar, you're definitely not alone. I'm Bix, and welcome back to Bix Book Summary, where we dive deep into life-changing books in a way that's both engaging and practical. Today, we're exploring Boundaries, When to Say Yes, How to Say No to Take Control of Your Life by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend, a book crafted for anyone who's ever felt overwhelmed, overcommitted, or simply drained by the constant demands on their time and energy. It's a guide for those of us who struggle to say no, who feel an overwhelming responsibility for everyone else's happiness, and who wake up each day wondering why we're so utterly exhausted. More than just a call to set limits, this book is about reclaiming control, not by shutting people out, but by learning where you end and others begin. As we journey through its insights, you'll discover practical strategies to protect your time, nurture your well-being, and create space for what truly matters. Trust me, once you master the art of setting healthy boundaries, everything changes. Meet Sherry. She's the person everyone relies on without question. The friend who always answers her phone no matter how exhausted she feels. The coworker who never hesitates to take on extra work. The devoted mom who sacrifices sleep to keep her kids on track. The loving wife who goes to great lengths to maintain harmony at home, and the dutiful daughter who never dares refuse her mother's guilt-laden requests. Every day, Sherry finds herself trapped in a relentless cycle of saying yes to every call, every favor, every unexpected crisis, while her own needs are pushed aside. Her mornings burst into chaos before the sun has even fully risen. The kids are scrambling out the door late for school, her husband's irritation builds over a missing breakfast, and just as she's ready to leave for work, her mother's familiar voice pulls her back into yet another obligatory visit. At work, the demands continue unabated. Her boss casually dumps an urgent report on her desk, something that should have been addressed weeks ago, accompanied by a smile that suggests her reliability somehow erases the inconvenience. Reluctantly, she agrees, even though she had planned to leave early to reclaim a small slice of time for herself. By the time she trudges home, Sherry is utterly spent. Her son resists his homework. Her daughter offers only silence, and her husband remains glued to the TV as if oblivious to the chaos. Just when she finally sinks into a brief moment of respite, the phone rings again. A friend in tears over another painful breakup, demanding an hour of her dwindling energy. The never-ending cycle leaves her collapsing into bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, overwhelmed by a bitter blend of resentment, exhaustion, and profound loneliness. In that still painful moment, it finally hits her. Her life isn't her own. After years of being everything to everyone else, she has lost herself entirely, and the saddest part is that she can't even trace where it all went so terribly wrong. Imagine owning a beautiful home, a house with a vibrant garden, a charming front yard, and a cozy living space that truly feels like your sanctuary. But here's the twist. You haven't put up a fence. At first, it might seem perfectly fine. You don't mind when neighbors wander across your lawn, or when a passerby stops to admire your flowers. However, over time, subtle changes begin to occur. Strangers start using your garden as a shortcut. Neighborhood kids dash across your yard, carelessly trampling your prized plants. And before you know it, someone even sets up an impromptu picnic in your backyard without asking. Gradually, your once private haven transforms into a space where people come and go at will. They take what they need, leave behind their mess, and rarely consider whether their actions are acceptable. Now ask yourself, whose fault is this? It's easy to point fingers at those who wander into your space, but the truth is, you never put up that fence. This scenario perfectly illustrates life without boundaries. A boundary acts like a fence. It clearly defines where your responsibilities start and end and tells others, this is mine and that is yours. Just as a physical fence protects your home, personal boundaries protect your time, energy, emotions, and overall well-being. Without them, you risk becoming overwhelmed, exhausted, and feeling completely used, just like Sherry. Many people mistakenly believe that setting boundaries means shutting others out, being selfish, or refusing to help. In reality, healthy boundaries empower you to build better relationships because they ensure you give from a place of genuine willingness rather than out of obligation. Think of it like your phone battery. If it's at 5%, you can't keep lending it out for everyone's calls. You need to recharge it first. Boundaries work the same way. They don't mean you don't care. They mean you care enough about yourself to ensure you have something left to give. And once you learn to set them, you stop feeling guilty for protecting your time. You cease to resent those who drain your energy, and most importantly, you begin living life on your own terms. Sherry had spent her entire life bending over backward for everyone else, convinced that being a good person meant never saying no. From an early age, it had become as natural as breathing, always saying yes to extra work, last-minute favors, unreasonable demands, even when every fiber of her being screamed to say no. It was an automatic response, a survival mechanism forged in years of self-sacrifice. But one evening, after yet another day of exhausting herself for others, a question finally broke through the fog of her habitual compliance. Why do I feel so empty, even when I do everything right? The answer was startlingly simple and painfully clear. She had no boundaries. That night, as she sat alone in the quiet dark, Sherry stumbled upon something that would transform her life: the 10 laws of boundaries. These weren't just abstract concepts. They were a blueprint for freedom, a set of rules designed to separate a life of constant exhaustion from one of genuine peace. For the first time, she saw the truth of her condition. All those years, she had been protecting people from facing the natural consequences of their actions, rescuing her perpetually tardy coworker, bailing out her sister from financial crises after reckless spending, covering for her husband when he shirked his responsibilities. She thought she was helping, but in reality, she was enabling destructive patterns, carrying burdens that weren't hers to bear, mistaking enabling for kindness. True kindness, she realized, wasn't about shielding others from their own choices. It was about allowing them to grow by facing the results of their actions. Yet, despite this revelation, a stubborn part of her still clung to the belief that she was responsible for everyone else's happiness. If someone was upset, she felt it was her duty to mend their broken heart. If a friend was struggling, she absorbed their pain as if it were her own. And if her boss was under stress, she instinctively took on the weight of his problems. She had convinced herself that this was love. But deep down, Sherry understood that healthy, genuine love wasn't about carrying the emotional burdens of others. It was about supporting them while still nurturing your own well-being. It was about recognizing that, although you can be there for someone, you are never responsible for their choices, their feelings, or their growth. The realization hit her hard. Her mother's loneliness, her coworkers' irresponsibility, her friends' self-destructive choices. They were never her responsibilities. For years, she had tried desperately to change the people around her. She believed that if she explained herself just right, if she was patient enough, if she sacrificed enough, her boss would learn to respect her time, her husband would finally appreciate her exhaustion, and her loved ones would transform for the better. But no matter how hard she tried, nothing ever changed. One day, the truth struck her like a ton of bricks. You cannot control other people. You can plead and compromise and even cry, but true change will only come if they want it to. From that moment on, Sherry made a powerful decision. She would stop trying to fix everyone else and start setting limits on what she was willing to tolerate. She began to understand that while she could not force her boss to stop dumping work on her, she could firmly say, "I'm not taking on extra assignments." She realized that although she couldn't make her husband suddenly value her, she could stop overextending herself for someone who never reciprocated. And even though she couldn't change her mother's guilt-tripping ways, she could gently tell her, "I love you, but I can't visit today." It was liberating to finally grasp that the only person she truly had control over was herself. Of course, there was still one lingering fear, the fear of people's reactions. For decades, Sherry had spent her life avoiding conflict, doing everything in her power to keep the peace. But she learned that real peace wasn't about never upsetting anyone. It was about learning to say no and accepting that not everyone would be pleased. When her newfound boundaries elicited pushback from her boss, disappointment from her friend, or hurt from her mother, Sherry felt a pang of fear. Yet with time, she discovered something extraordinary. The people who genuinely respected her adjusted, while those who didn't had only been in her life because she never set any limits before. Gradually, she came to understand that the discomfort of setting boundaries was only temporary, while the exhaustion of living without them would have been permanent. The more she practiced, the clearer it became that boundaries weren't walls meant to shut people out. They were gentle lines that defined what she would and wouldn't accept. She realized she didn't need permission to protect her time, that she didn't have to wait for the perfect moment to say no. Instead, she could simply decide, right then and there, that she deserved better. In doing so, she stopped hoping for others to change and began actively creating relationships that honored her well-being. Sherry's journey wasn't easy, and it came with its share of conflicts and heartaches. But with every boundary she set, she reclaimed a little more of herself. She no longer felt overwhelmed by the weight of others' problems, and the constant drain of trying to be everything to everyone faded away. For the first time in her life, she felt free. Free to care for herself, free to live on her own terms, and free to finally fill the empty spaces inside her with peace, joy, and a newfound sense of self-worth. Sherry knew the theory inside and out now. She understood that she wasn't responsible for everyone else's problems, that people needed to face the natural consequences of their actions, and that while she couldn't control others, she had complete authority over her own choices. Yet, knowing these truths and actually living them were two very different battles. The very first time she said no, an overwhelming wave of guilt crashed over her. Her boss had asked her, as he always did, to take on an extra project. A request that, for years, she would have met with a smile, a nod, and countless late evenings at the office, even if it meant missing dinner with her family. But on this day, after an especially draining week of self-sacrifice, she took a deep, steadying breath and simply said, "I won't be able to take this on." For a long, heavy moment, there was silence. Her boss raised an eyebrow and asked, "Why not?" In that instant, Sherry felt the old pressure of her past habits creeping in, urging her to backpedal, to justify, to give excuses or apologies for setting this boundary. But she stayed firm, repeating her decision with quiet conviction. "I won't be able to take this on." She ended the conversation without argument, explanation, or remorse. Walking out of that office, she felt lighter than she had in years. It was then that she grasped her first golden rule of boundary setting. You don't owe anyone an explanation for protecting your time and energy. Over-explaining only invites manipulation, guilt, and pressure to revert to old patterns. With that realization, she began to practice in small, deliberate ways. When her mother called with familiar guilt trips about visiting, instead of offering endless excuses, she said calmly, "I love you, Mom, but I won't be able to come over this weekend." When her friend called late at night, desperate to unload another relationship crisis, she answered briefly, "Hey, I'm about to sleep. Let's talk tomorrow." And when her husband left his responsibilities on her plate, she trusted him enough to say, "I trust you to handle that." And she resisted the urge to swoop in and fix it. With every no she uttered, every small act of self-respect, the heavy resentment she'd carried for so long began to fade, and the chronic exhaustion that had defined her existence started to lift. She stopped feeling like life was something that simply happened to her, and instead began to realize that she was in control. Of course, not everyone welcomed her newfound boundaries. Her boss grumbled about the extra work she refused, her friend expressed disappointment, and her mother acted hurt when plans changed. But Sherry soon discovered that the people who truly respected her adjusted to her limits, while those who resisted had only been there because she had never set any at all. In that moment, she understood a second golden rule. Those who get the angriest about your boundaries are usually the ones who benefited most from your absence of them, and that is not your burden to fix. With each step forward, she embraced the power of her choices, realizing that The temporary discomfort of setting boundaries was a small price to pay for a life where she was no longer drained, but instead free to live on her own terms. At first, saying no felt incredibly uncomfortable. For years, she had associated boundaries with selfishness, believing that a truly good person never disappoints others. Yet as she began to practice setting limits, a profound truth emerged. Saying no didn't make her selfish, it made her honest. Setting boundaries didn't make her mean, it made her strong. And prioritizing her own well-being didn't mark her as a bad person, it transformed her into a healthy one. Gradually, she noticed a remarkable change. The more she respected herself, the more others began to honor that respect in return. The relationships rooted in genuine love and mutual admiration flourished, while those that had only clung to her because she had no boundaries started to crumble. And she didn't miss those shallow connections at all. For the first time in her life, she discovered that her world was her own. That reclaiming her time and energy allowed her to live authentically. It was a liberating realization, a turning point where she recognized that self-respect wasn't an act of isolation, but the foundation for deeper, more meaningful relationships. As she embraced her new way of living, each clear, firm no became a declaration of her worth, a reminder that her well-being mattered. In that moment, she finally understood that boundaries were not barriers to connection, but bridges to true intimacy and self-empowerment. And her life, once defined by constant sacrifice, was now filled with the promise of freedom. So here's the truth that boundaries teaches us. If you keep saying yes to everyone, you'll eventually lose yourself in the process. When you never stand up for your time, energy, and emotional well-being, people will continue to take as much as you allow them to. But the moment you set clear boundaries, everything changes. You start waking up without dread, you find time for yourself, and the constant feelings of resentment and exhaustion begin to fade away. You come to realize that people are perfectly capable of handling their own lives, and you no longer have to carry their burdens. At the end of the day, your life belongs solely to you. And the real question becomes, are you ready to take it back? I want to hear from you. What's one boundary you know you need to set in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your experiences. If you found this message helpful, please hit that like button. It really supports the channel. And if you're eager for more life-changing book summaries that genuinely help you grow, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Plus, if you're interested in reading Boundaries for Yourself, I've linked the book in the description. It's one of those transformative reads that can truly change your life if you let it. Until next time, remember to respect your time, protect your energy, and take control of your life. I'll see you in the next one.